Lafayette Police 911.
Yes, ma'am. Shot fired. Shot fired.
Somebody hit?
Yes, ma'am.
Somebody got shot?
Yes, ma'am.
Did somebody shoot you?
Yeah, no, I'm ready to stab me.
You're stabbed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, is the person there that did it?
Yes, ma'am. I think so.
Where are they at? Who is it?
I don't know.
Where's the person that stabbed you?
Whoa! Fire! 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 Fire!
What?
Fire!
Okay, what's that noise going off? Are you still there?
Within minutes, Lafayette, Indiana police respond to the call.
When I got that call, I was just getting on to duty that day and just started my shift because we started at 6 a.m. At which point I started heading that way with lights and sirens. And I activated my body camera before we got to the scene. When I got to the scene, there was a house that was on fire, and I saw a person that was over by the mailbox.
Over here, have a seat. Have a seat.
He had no shirt on, he was bloody at that moment, he was bent over and obviously in pain.
Get medics here. I have the subject out front as well that's been stabbed. He's bleeding.
He tells officers his name, Jimmy Knight, and says his landlord and roommate, Ron Wiles, has been shot and is still inside the house.
2 officers were already up at the front door. You could see the flames coming out of the side window that's next to the front door, and they were trying to kick in the front door.
White! Try it! Hit it! Do it again!
I was worried. Obviously, the heat is a big factor because if anything goes, or we don't know what's inside this house.
So one of you guys have a gas mask in your car? I do not. Who is that? That is the guy that I think is stabbed. Alright, that's in the house. Hold on. Do you guys have it? Yeah, we're hitting it right now.
We had to back away from the front door because the heat from the fire that was in that area, and plus the flames I saw inside the window, and all that was coming out towards the front door. So smoke was coming out through the top of the roof. It was coming out from underneath the door and around it. And at one point it got so hot and so smoky that we had to back away because we were all kind of coughing at that moment. It was a chaotic situation. We had the house fire, which was going up, and we had possibly another person still inside the house. So we couldn't account for them or even what was going on in there. Other than that, we also have a suspect. Where is that suspect? Is he here? Is he planning an ambush, or what are we looking at? You had a lot of factors going into it. We had the victim that needed to be attended to for medical purposes. We didn't know exactly how bad those wounds were.
Okay, we need to probably get him moved if we can't.
Hey, do you want to glove up? We're going to carry him away. Yeah. Hey, can you walk? Can you see if you can stand up? Alright. Can you move this arm? Yeah, we do. Come on. Hey, we're just gonna grab you if you can't stand up, okay? I know it hurts, buddy, but we gotta get you away. Let's go down here. Oh. Hang on. I know it hurts, man, but we gotta get you moved. Okay, this is good. Right here.
The victim is safe, but the fire is expanding.
Due to not being able to make entry into the front of the house, we made our way around to the side of the house to see if there was any other entry points, at which time, when we go around, we noticed there was blood on a window.
There's blood crawling up this. Lafayette, please! See if you can get through that goddamn fence. Hinges are coming this way. Just trying to get rid of the damn thing.
When we went to the backyard, there was a deck back there. We went up to the back door.
Lafayette, please!
We saw that the screen door was closed, and then the actual hard door on the inside was wide open.
Nobody. I hear something in there. More people inside. We can't get in. I can hear people. That roof is completely. Lafayette, police. Police! Now! Come to my boy! There's 2 more people inside.
So we started yelling in to try to get attention of anybody that may be inside.
Hey, come to my boys! Get down on the ground and come towards our boys! Stay low!
Anything to try to stir anybody and try to get them to us,
To the light!
get them out of that house that is completely on fire.
Roll!
Eventually, it just got to the point where that black smoke was coming out so thick that we had to back off because we all were coughing.
Get out of the smoke. Go. Let fire do their job.
The firefighters put out the blaze and enter the house.
Have they been able to confirm if anybody else is in there or not?
I asked one of the firemen, hey, did you guys find anybody inside the house? He said he didn't know at that moment, but then a few moments later, he told me, yes, they had verified that there was one person that they found inside.
We did find one person there so far. 10 gone.
Alive or dead? All right.
The victim is identified as the homeowner, Ron Wiles.
My relationship with Ron was more like a brotherhood. We've known each other since 6th grade summer and got very close because Ron was a gentle soul. He could defuse any situation, even when friends were disagreeing. And it never resulted in anything violent. Ron just despised fisticuffs.
When I found out about Ron, I had texted him and I was asking him about something. He never responded back, and I thought that's really odd. And my wife and I went by Ron's house, and then there was all the police cars and ambulances. Well, what was going through my mind was probably the worst. My initial feeling was anger. How could this happen to somebody like Ron? He was the person that would help strangers at the drop of a hat. So yeah, I was angry, and I couldn't understand how it would happen.
This crime scene was a little bit different because, in a fire, you're gonna lose a lot of things. You're gonna lose DNA, you're gonna lose fingerprints. So we try to keep everything intact as best as possible to get the best evidence that we can send to the lab to help us put these pieces of this puzzle together.
During the initial phases of our crime scene analysis, when Ron was located, officers and detectives got in there and they seen that he had gunshot wounds. The cause of death was the gunshot wounds to major organs. This was a homicide. The evidence that was found at the scene was shell casings, a knife, and blood. There was also a pour pattern of ignitable substance.
Close to the bed was Ron's wallet with his driver's license through Indiana, and it had been gone through. Is this also a robbery?
With a crime scene or anything like this, and in this case in particular, there was an immense amount of evidence.
When you see multiple things going on at a crime scene, your head starts to spin.
It was a mystery from the get-go. We didn't have anything to go by. We had evidence, but no suspects. It was a true whodunit.
Detectives need to speak to the surviving victim, Jimmy Knight, currently in the ICU.
It was very important to speak to him because his injuries were such that we weren't sure that he was going to live through them. So there was a very dire need to speak to him fast, in that if he had to go into surgery and did not make it through surgery.
Jimmy Knight's statement was going to be crucial. One, because he was the initial 911 caller. And he also had contact with the suspect, and he was still living. So right now, he's the one person that potentially has all of our information on how to find out who did this.
You up that what? Somebody shot your landlord.
Lafayette 14. Wisconsin. My subject here is saying that someone shot the landlord in the house that he was in with him. They can hear saying that the landlord was shot prior to the house catching on fire.
Jimmy told detectives when they were able to talk to him in the hospital, he heard what he thought was firecrackers, so he opens up his door and looks towards Ron's room and sees an individual firing at Ron. And then when he surprised this individual, he fought for the gun.
In the middle of this fight, he wasn't sure exactly what happened. He thought he was being punched or hit, but it turned out he was being stabbed. He was able to get away, get back into his room, call 911, and as he's doing that, he's hearing some more shots, and then sees that there's flames and there's a fire, and he tries to get out of the house.
As a detective, we question everything, and we start with basically skepticism on everything that everyone tells us. The story that Jimmy told us initially sounded very plausible simply because of evidence that we had been able to corroborate inside the crime scene.
The next morning, investigators searched the burned remains of Ron's house.
CSI went into the house. They located several places where bullets had gone through, like doorways or door frames. After sifting through a lot of some of the ashes on the floor, some shell casings were located. Obviously, the body is technically evidence at that point. The wallet being gone through, did the person pull his wallet from his dresser, his pocket, the nightstand, and then go through it? So is this also a robbery? Is that the reason for the homicide? It just kind of adds an extra layer of something that we're gonna have to untangle later. The crime scene investigators that were outside noticed a set of white headphones kind of outside one of the trucks by a door. Is that involved? We don't know, but they're gonna take that and secure that as evidence because it could be the driver of that vehicle, right? It could be a passerby that dropped him, or it could be our suspect. So our CSIs secured it, photographed it, and then we were able to later send it to the lab.
As we were canvassing the neighborhood, we did have a neighbor who had their vehicles broken into. They said that they've had items stolen from their truck before,
including 2 handguns.
I had a 38 Rossi that's gone. I had a 40 Smith & Wesson MP that's gone out of this one. I mean, we're carrying for personal protection.
You said you had a 38 Rossi. What color was it?
Black.
Okay.
Stub nose. It had a leather case made by
Listen to
Rossi,
the
a tan leather case.
Huh?
Like
He
a
broke in his van too.
hip holster thing. Oh yeah, my
Is
window's
that
busted
the
out.
only thing that was...
The only thing of any value.
Okay. Just other minor things that were
Yeah,
taken as well?
everything in my truck's been tossed. My glove box, everything in my backseat was tossed around. Everything in this truck. I had 2 cartons of cigarettes in this truck that's gone. A cup full of change, gone.
That we have a gunshot victim inside the house, it's a high probability that the person that stole these guns went in to do more and then ended up shooting Ron.
When I found out the guns had been stolen, just kind of a little light bulb, just kind of something to keep in the back of your head. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and go down one avenue 100 miles an hour and just forget about other things, but that's something that you're going to keep in the back of your head, that maybe one of these guns is related to this incident.
Detectives speak with more neighbors and learn of another car burglary and the name of the possible thief.
I got in my truck, I think it was like Monday or Tuesday morning, about 4 or 5 a.m. I was sitting there smoking a cigarette, let my truck warm up before I left for work. And I seen someone outside my truck. I seen somebody moving. So I rolled my window down, and it was Chris.
That was when?
It's been Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
It was the day before my ashtray came up missing with all my change.
Okay.
That next day after I seen him that morning, I got my same routine, got in my truck, I'm smoking a cigarette, let my truck warm up, and I've got a Bluetooth transmitter down plugged into the cigarette lighter right beside the ashtray. I reached down to turn it on, and I noticed all the silver, it catches my eye, it's gone. My whole ashtray was pulled out.
Okay.
Well, then I know, I on the way to work, I got to feeling on my shifter, and I kept my grandfather's watch on my shifter, and I noticed it was gone. Well, when I got home from work that day, I got on Facebook.
And that was Monday?
Yeah, Monday or Tuesday, beginning of the week. I got on Facebook, and I was like, because he's not the brightest character. So I was like, maybe posted it online for sale. And boom, lo and behold, as soon as I typed it in, first picture, my grandfather's watch right there.
Who had it on for sale?
It's Chris and Amanda. They've got a joint Facebook.
Okay.
But we met up with her up at Champs, and I told her, I was like, look, that's my grandfather's watch. I can tell you right now, there's a hole in the top of the glass for me wearing it, and I explained to her, told her some characteristics about it. She's like, I had no idea.
My initial thought that we had someone that had escalated their behavior from just simply going into vehicles and finding unlocked vehicles and stealing things to then committing murder.
Detectives learn Chris Johnson has a surprising connection to the victim.
Chris Johnson, they also known that he is also one that had worked with Ron Wiles for a while and believed that they did not end on good terms.
Once we found out that Chris might have taken the watch and then the handguns were stolen right near the scene of a homicide, it was very possible that Chris had something to do with the homicide of Ron.
Chris Johnson was a local individual that has had many police contacts in his life. So we knew Chris and we knew how he lived his life. And his MO was stealing things, getting enough money to basically live off of.
Detectives learn that Chris Johnson had been living in one of the rental houses owned by the deceased Ron Wiles.
And we learned that Chris and Ron had been into a heated argument, that they had had some sort of falling out about money owed to him.
He also had a warrant for an unrelated case. Based on Mr. Johnson's past and the things that we're piecing together with the thefts, you want to find anybody that could be a potential suspect as fast as possible. So it was important that we tracked him down sooner rather than later.
While detectives search for their latest suspect, Ron's friends pay their respects.
Ron wanted to be cool. He used to tell people I taught him how to be cool. Well, most of our friends told us I failed. But Ron, we picked nicknames as kids. Ron's nickname was Fondarelli. I even wanted to put it on his headstone if I had a choice. He was the cool dude.
I've never had another friend like Ron. He was very generous. He spoke his mind. He was very, very giving. I miss Ron. Obviously, getting up in age, you find that your friends are getting fewer and fewer. Life gets in the way. His relationship with a lot of his friends spanned years, if not decades. And it's just, I think that maybe, the closeness may not have always been there, but the camaraderie was always there.
We wanted to find Chris for his warrants, but more importantly, we wanted to interview him for what he knew and maybe what he had done at Ron's house. We located Chris in another one of Ron's rental houses up on South Street. It only took us, I think, around 12 to 24 hours to find him.
I had been at headquarters kind of getting a new game plan on how we were going to proceed, and once they located him, they brought him to headquarters, and then I conducted the interview with Mr. Johnson.
You want to take your handcuffs off?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
cinema.
So my initial thought was, let's talk to him about the theft. It's the lesser of the things. If he is our suspect and he did just shoot somebody and stab somebody, let's talk to him about the little thing that he's willing to talk about first, and then we'll transition into the information about the homicide.
Yes,
So for us to be able to play the cards right and be able to talk to him about a murder, this really needed to be a lot slower of a process and take our time with him to build rapport and such, because he, all in all, he knew he was going to jail the minute that police had contact with him. He knew he was going to jail. So whether he's going to jail for his warrants or whether he's going to jail for murder, we really had to be careful with him.
I've never talked to you before.
No, we had never met that before. So I'm gonna get some real quick basic information from you.
Yeah.
Do you work anywhere?
Yeah, I work for myself, and I work for Ron.
Ron? Who's Ron?
Ron Wiles, the owner of that building.
What building?
On South Street. He's a landlord slash subcontractor.
Okay, so he I guess, so he's your landlord basically. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
You need to work for him?
Yeah.
What kind of work?
Clean up, demolition, tree trimming.
Okay. Kind of like random odd jobs here and there? Okay. How long have you been working for him?
Well, off and on for 10 years.
When's the last time you did a job for him?
I fixed a truck brake line for him, about 3 months ago?
Okay.
I've been doing my own tree trim and stuff lately.
I wanted to get a background on how he knew Ron and try to figure out what their relationship was like. And Chris was one of those kids that, you know, had a rough life. He had been in and out of trouble. Obviously, we knew that. Ron kind of always had a soft spot for people like that. So he was always trying to help everybody kind of get a leg up, give them a second chance, that kind of thing.
Ron was a true believer in second chances, and sometimes third and fourth, because, you know, you don't always just pop right up out of a troubled life and be successful right out of the box. Ron would tolerate their steps backwards, if you want to call it, and find a way to make it to where they could find something that they could do, as simple as just sitting with a skill saw and cutting firewood out of chairs for him. He loved tearing down old buildings and reusing all the materials. And I think that's what he thought he was doing with these people's lives. He was taking a used life that had been abused and giving them a chance to be somebody.
Once we got to the point in the interview where I felt it was necessary to tell him that Ron had died, and I did so, he had what I felt like was a pretty genuine response.
Well, so I did talk to some of the other detectives that have been at the house.
Yeah.
And it's not looking good for Ron. Doesn't look like he made it.
What the
So that's part of this issue. That's why we're asking you guys these questions and talking to people, neighbors, and that kind of stuff.
And they know the fire was intentionally set?
Yeah, because there's some other things that go on that were involved, I guess, with the fire.
Man, no, but yeah, I would do it. Damn.
So with that being said, and again, this is just part of my job, but you didn't have anything to do with the fire. You wouldn't have hurt Ron.
I hurt him. He's dead.
You wouldn't have hurt him in any way with any type of weapon or anything like that?
Like that.
Okay.
Instant tears, very upset, didn't really want to believe what I was telling him, you know, and very adamant that he did not have anything to do with Ron being dead.
Oh, God. Oh. He wasn't a bad dude. He always helped me through my whole life.
Do you know anybody that would have want to hurt him or see him dead?
Yeah. Oh my God.
That's what we're trying to figure out here, Chris. So if you have any...
He was a good dude.
Now, I'm gonna ask, who would have done this to Ron then? Give us some information on where do we go next. If it's not you, then who? Who would have had an issue with Ron? How can we find the person that would maybe argue with him?
If you have any information that would help us, now would be the time to talk
You
about
got
it.
it. Alright, people have been mad at Ron in the last year. Let's see. People have been mad at Ron in the last year.
Well, maybe let's narrow that down to like last couple months.
Rick and him got into it. He kicked Andy Alcorn off his property.
But were these recently?
Andy Alcorn was, recently. Like that's been,
What was their issue?
they were staying with people just flopping around.
After speaking to Mr. Johnson, we have two new suspects potentially in this case, Richard Stevenson and Andrew Alcorns. Two new names that we have to go track down that could be potential suspects and or witnesses or have some involvement in some kind.
Well, unfortunately, you do have the warrant, so you're gonna go with these guys.
Yeah, I know.
But it's, like I said, if you hear anything or something comes up about this, you give me a call, okay?
Yeah, I gotta do 2 years over this, so it's gonna be what?
Well, I'm just saying, you can get a message to somebody if you hear something or you think I need to talk to somebody.
Alright.
Alright? I appreciate you talking to me, Chris.
So it's expanding our investigation. It appeared that the mystery of who killed Ron was just beginning. Once we have the two new names, we kind of divide our forces and go try to find both of them. We're doing it simultaneously. It's just, who can we track down first? Where do we find them at? And we found Richard Stevenson first, and he had gotten arrested, and he happened to be at a local hospital. He was less than thrilled to speak with us, just based on his prior history of multiple arrests for multiple things.
I like Ron. Ron was a good guy. He helped me and my wife out when we came. We didn't have no food in our house, and he didn't have enough work. He wasn't to work that day. He said, "This is all I can do for you. You're not going to you and your son and wife go hungry." But he went out and bought us like almost $80 worth of groceries and gave me $20 to be able to get back before things to school. Ron was a good guy, man. A real good guy. And he didn't deserve something like that. Neither did his roommate either.
He told us that Ron was always trying to help everybody kind of get a leg up, give him a second chance. He told us that he didn't have any involvement in the killing of Ron, and he denied knowing anything about it, not being involved at all.
Richard then surprises detectives by mentioning someone they should investigate. It's a name they've heard before.
You look at motherfucking Andy Alcorn. He's just $35 right now to go and get his old lady out of jail. Swear to God, he kept saying every day, "I'm gonna rob him."
That he was talking about robbing him on Saturday?
Yeah. And that's the day that it happened.
What was his exact words?
He said, "I'm gonna rob this fat son of a go get my wife out of jail."
And the fat son of a was Ron?
Yes.
And then to get his wife out of jail?
His wife died. Mm-hmm. His wife died, but his girlfriend was in jail.
Okay. So to get his girlfriend out of jail?
Yes, his girlfriend. I didn't even say his wife because his wife was dead. His wife died previously, a couple days before that. The old lady got arrested. And Ron kicked him out of those day houses he had. I kicked him off the property. And that's when he was saying, "I'm gonna rob this son of a." He kept saying, "Saturday, I'm gonna go get him. I'm gonna get him on Saturday right after he collects all his rent money. Kill his son, take everything he's got."
Andrew Alcorn's girlfriend, Paige Berry, was the name that came up in an interview when we talked to Richard. He told us that we probably needed to focus on looking for or finding Alcorns, based on the fact that he knew Alcorns had been asking a lot of people for money because Paige had gotten arrested and she needed bond money. And Alcorns is kind of one of those guys that's just a little out there, volatile, I guess.
When'd you talk to him? When did he say that?
He said that for months. He was working on Ron's place.
When's the last time he said it?
Probably about a week before Ron got killed. I mean, it just makes sense to me.
Right.
It was a Saturday.
If he's saying he's gonna kill him, and
it was a Saturday that it all happened.
So he said, "I'm gonna go kill Ron to go get money to get his girlfriend out of jail."
Yeah, that's what he wanted. He said he was gonna kill Ron because he needed $1,000 to get his old lady out of jail.
Gotcha.
Once we were provided with Andrew's name, and it came from 2 different people, at least as far as we know, are unrelated at this point, right? We don't know that Chris and Ricky have talked and conspired to give us Andrew's name, right? It was separate incidents in separate situations. That kind of sparks a little bit of, okay, we probably really need to focus our efforts on this Andrew. We're feeling like maybe we're on the right track here. So we want to find him, want to narrow down where he's at, lock him into a statement.
When we started digging into Andrew Alcorns, we noticed he had some legal issues in other areas and other problems, and very similar instances were occurring that had occurred in our city, had occurred in their city as well, with stolen cars and stolen property.
We found out that Andrew Alcorns and Paige both had been kicked out of one of Ron's apartments, and she had been arrested in a different county a couple days prior. Paige had attempted to use a stolen credit card that was from a stolen vehicle that she had been in with Andrew Alcorns. She was captured by the police. However, he got away, and his location at that point was unknown.
Detectives learn Paige recently posted bail and is no longer behind bars.
When I got the information about her arrest and just kind of what had happened, I asked if I could have copies or access to their jail phone system so that I could listen to any jail phone calls that were previously made. On the recordings from that county, there were phone calls from Paige to Andrew Alcorns, conversations about her needing to get out of jail.
How much you gotta get still?
300.
Still gotta get. I thought you only had a couple hundred left earlier.
I do, Paige. I ain't been able to get nothing.
Oh no, baby.
I'm trying my hardest, man.
I'm not getting out tonight, huh?
I'm gonna try, girl.
Why didn't you ask Ron last night?
What?
I said, why didn't you ask Ron last night? Andy, I'm not going to make it in here. Do you realize that?
Paige, I'm trying my absolute hardest, I swear to God.
Once we learned what we learned from Paige and Andy's phone call, we thought that the financial resource that Ron would provide for Paige to get out of jail was absolutely a motive for this crime.
We need to find this guy quickly because he could be a potential threat. He could do something else now. I mean, he's kind of running amok, and his world is starting to slowly crash in on him. Later, we learned that Andrew and Paige were barricaded inside this apartment in Dayton, Ohio. The Dayton Police Department surrounded the house. They had assembled their SWAT team and their negotiating team. We know him to be volatile. We know him to have guns. And so I wasn't completely sure that we would arrive and Alcorns or Paige would still be alive by the time I got there.
Detectives have just learned that prime suspect Andrew Alcorns, along with his girlfriend Paige Berry, have barricaded themselves inside a building in Dayton, Ohio.
I was with a photographer that day that listens to a police scanner a lot. So he was listening to that, and he goes, hey, they're surrounding an apartment building on Arnold Place, and it sounds like they're looking for a homicide suspect. So we're like, let's go over there. Maybe we get them being brought out and get video of them being put in a cruiser, and hey, we got an extra thing for our news.
Dayton SWAT team and a suspect now in its 9th hour. SWAT officers fired several dozen tear gas canisters into an apartment here on Arnold Place near Salem Avenue, trying to force the people to come outside. News Center 7's Mike Campbell brought us the very latest at 5 o'clock. He is still on scene with what has happened over the last hour. Mike.
Well, James, we can tell you that there's been a general downgrade in the frequency of the tear gas canisters and concussion grenades being fired into the house, although you hear some right now. The other thing that has changed is in the last half hour, the SWAT team members have moved a truck that was parked further back on the grass right up against the building, and they are continuing to look for at least one person that's still in an apartment with shattered windows.
As we're driving to Ohio, I'm on the phone, text messages with the negotiators, and they're like, yeah, we have the throw phone in the house. We can see two people moving, but they're firing rounds at our officers. Our officers have fired back.
Once we learned the standoff situation and the SWAT team being activated and gas being inserted into the home, obviously my concern is, the police, because this individual we knew was dangerous, was also on drugs, so we weren't sure what was going to happen. Either he could shoot one of the officers or shoot Paige. We were concerned that this was not going to end well.
The SWAT team began an all-out assault with tear gas canisters about 3 Thursday afternoon. They had tried negotiating by phone and with bullhorns, but they didn't convince anyone to leave the apartment. When you're trying to cover an event like this, you're seeing and hearing the tear gas being fired. You're thinking you can hear the gunshots, but he was inside an apartment, so that was tough to hear, is that a tear gas canister I'm hearing, or is that a gunshot I'm hearing? It's all a little bit of a mystery exactly what's going on. Reporting live in Dayton, Mike Campbell, News Center 7.
I was back and forth with the SWAT team and the negotiators. They had said that they heard one single gunshot. It didn't come from any of them on the outside. So they believed that inside the apartment, one round had been fired. They had attempted several times to make contact with Andrew in the apartment.
At some point, Alcorn's gun had jammed and given Paige the opportunity to basically flee the apartment. Once Paige was able to flee, get to safety, Dayton PD was getting ready to make a dynamic entry into the building. They heard another shot.
They had said that they heard one round had been fired.
After an 11-hour standoff, police enter the apartment and make a startling discovery.
They found Andrew in the closet with what appeared to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. But he did not die.
The apartment was searched. Semi-automatic handgun was located along with ammunition, and then there was drugs and drug paraphernalia also located. When Grant and I went to Dayton a few days later and spoke to Paige at the jail, we asked her specifically about the possibility and the capabilities of Andrew killing Ron. And she did say that he was suicidal and had been doing a lot of drugs and was pretty much an unstable person at this point.
I did attempt an interview with Mr. Alcorns, however, he declined to provide a statement to us. I was just able to secure the DNA. Through the investigation, the DNA information came back from the headphones that were located at the scene. It did not implicate Chris Johnson and did not implicate Richard Stevenson. It did, however, come back to Andrew Alcorns.
Based on everything that we had, the evidence, the statements, his actions, we did believe that at this point, Andrew Alcorns was our suspect.
Andrew Alcorns is arrested for the murder of Ron Wiles and attempted murder of Jimmy Knight. He agrees to a plea deal and is sentenced to 70 years in prison. Paige Berry pleads guilty to tampering with evidence and is sentenced to 1 year in prison for her involvement with the standoff.
Based on all the information that we'd had, what we believe happened is Ron had money. Andrew did go and ask Ron for some money to bond out Paige. Didn't go the way that he wanted it to go. So Andrew decided, I'm gonna take this into my own hands. Shots were fired. He didn't anticipate that there was gonna be a third person in Jimmy Knight. There was a fight, a confrontation. He stabbed Mr. Knight several times, thinking probably that he killed him. And so now he's freaking out because he just shot a guy, maybe stabbed a guy to death. What do I do? I'm gonna set the house on fire. This case case was difficult and it was a mystery. I mean, we didn't really have a lot of information right off the bat. It kind of felt like we were chasing a ghost a little bit. I invested a lot of time and effort and mental capacity to this case to try and make sure that I was thinking through everything and we were doing the right things to try and get some sort of closure for Ron and for his family.
Mystery behind this case is it was a true whodunit from the get-go, so we had to develop our own suspect, and we did that by just good old-fashioned police work.
I'd like Ron to be remembered as the person that he truly was. The kind-hearted person that would help other people down on their luck, regardless of their social status.
I think Ron did trust people too much. He just felt that there was good in everyone. Old, young, it didn't matter. Ron felt like there was good in all people. They say you die twice. Once physically, and once when no one could say your name out loud. And I'm here to say it out loud. Ron Wiles was my friend.
The sound that started everything was so ordinary that no one reported it. A dull thump, low and brief, swallowed by the Florida night. No scream followed. No alarm. Just silence settling back into place, thick and humid. The kind of silence that makes even the cicadas hesitate. By morning, that silence had a name. Laura Bennett was missing. And from that moment on, nothing in this quiet community would ever feel ordinary again. It was April of 2001, a Tuesday, the kind of weekday that dissolves into routine. The neighborhood sat on the edge of Tampa, trimmed hedges, pale stucco houses, mailboxes lined up like soldiers. People waved. People trusted. People believed bad things happened somewhere else. Laura Bennett lived alone at the end of the cul-de-sac, 34 years old, recently divorced, rebuilding her life with the discipline of someone determined not to fall apart. She jogged every morning before sunrise. She parked her car the same way every night. She locked her doors. Always. At 6:42 a.m., a neighbor walking a dog noticed Laura's garage door hanging halfway open. At 7:10, another neighbor saw her sedan parked crooked in the driveway, driver's door ajar, keys still in the ignition. By 8:03, police cruisers rolled in, blue lights flashing against pastel walls. Radios crackling with the first uneasy questions. Where was Laura Bennett? And why did everything she owned seem to be waiting for her to come back? Inside the house, nothing made sense because everything was normal. Too normal. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter. Her phone rested beside it, battery dead. A mug with dried coffee rings stood in the sink. Laundry was folded on the couch, carefully stacked. There were no broken windows, no overturned furniture, no blood. No sign that a crime had taken place at all. Just a woman erased between night and morning. Detectives moved through the house slowly, their instincts warning them even as the evidence refused to cooperate. Adults did not simply vanish, not without leaving something behind. They photographed every corner, bagged nothing, wrote notes filled with frustration. Outside, neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering, replaying the night in their heads. Someone mentioned a car idling late. Someone else thought they heard footsteps. Another remembered nothing at all. Memory, already unreliable, began to fracture under pressure. By the second day, Laura's face filled television screens. Smiling, dark hair pulled back. The words mysterious disappearance scrolled beneath her image. Volunteers arrived with water bottles and gloves. Search dogs traced her scent to the edge of the driveway, then stopped, confused, tails low. Helicopters scanned wetlands shimmering under the sun. Nothing surfaced. No clothing. No footprints. No trail leading anywhere. Police dug into Laura's life. Recently divorced meant ex-husband. He was questioned, cleared, questioned again. Work colleagues described her as focused, private, cautious. No enemies. No secret relationships. No that's. No plans to leave town. Her bank accounts remained untouched. Her car had not moved. If Laura left, she left without herself. And then there was Mark Holloway, 41 years old, lived 2 streets away, divorced, worked maintenance jobs, nothing that drew attention. He knew Laura the way neighbors know each other in places like this. A wave, a nod. He had fixed a section of her fence after a storm months earlier. When detectives knocked on his door, he invited them in without hesitation. He answered questions calmly. He offered an alibi before they asked for one. He said he was home all night, alone, watching television. Named the shows, named the times, fell asleep on the couch, woke up to the news like everyone else. Nothing contradicted him. No witness placed him near Laura's house. No physical evidence tied him to her disappearance. His name was written down, circled once, then pushed aside as detectives chased louder leads. That is how cold cases begin. Not with drama, but with quiet decisions that feel reasonable at the time. Weeks passed, then months. Laura Bennett did not come home. Her parents aged visibly in front of cameras, clinging to hope because the alternative was unbearable. Detectives rotated. Leads dried up. Media attention drifted away, replaced by fresher tragedies. Laura's case file grew heavier, not with answers, but with paper. Tips that went nowhere. Sightings that dissolved under scrutiny. Dreams mistaken for memories. By the end of the first year, the word cold hovered unspoken in the precinct. No body meant no crime scene. No crime scene meant no charges. Legally, Laura could still be alive somewhere, choosing not to be found. But no one truly believed that. Not the detectives who stared at her photo late at night. Not the neighbors who still avoided her empty driveway. Not the community that had learned how fragile safety really was. Time did what time always does. It buried urgency. New cases arrived. Old detectives retired. Laura Bennett became a name younger officers learned during briefings, a reminder of how some questions never stop asking themselves. Her photo hung in a hallway, edges curling, colors fading. Every year, someone changed the date on the missing person flyer. Every year, nothing changed. In 2012, a sentence was spoken that would later feel important, though no one realized it then. Mark Holloway, arrested on a minor charge unrelated to Laura, sat in a holding cell and made a comment to another inmate. Casual, almost joking. Some things stay buried if you dig deep enough. It earned a laugh and nothing more. The sentence drifted away, meaningless without context, waiting for someone to remember it. Years continued to slide by. Technology advanced. Cold case units formed. Files were reopened, re-examined, digitized. In 2018, Laura's disappearance was officially labeled a cold case. The phrase carried finality and hope in equal measure. It meant the case was not forgotten, only sleeping, waiting. Then, in late 2020, a detective assigned to review unresolved disappearances noticed something small. A detail so minor it had survived untouched for nearly 2 decades. Mark Holloway's television alibi. The shows he claimed to watch had aired at different times in reruns during that period. It was the kind of inconsistency that once would have been dismissed as faulty memory. But memory mattered now. The detective pulled phone records. Sparse, but telling in their emptiness. No calls. No activity. A quiet night, just as Mark had described. Or just as someone would want it to look. In January 2021, Mark Holloway contacted police. No lawyer. No demands. He said he wanted to talk. He said he was tired. He said the past had weight. In a small interview room, under fluorescent lights, he said Laura Bennett's name out loud for the first time in 20 years. The room changed instantly. Air tightened. Pens hovered. His words came in pieces. He placed himself near her house, then denied it. He described fear without explaining why. He said he never meant for anything to happen, then insisted nothing happened at all. He spoke of accidents, of moments that cannot be taken back. He did not say where Laura was. He did not say what he did. And yet, when he finished, the alibi that had protected him for decades lay in ruins. The confession was incomplete. Inadmissible. Not enough to charge. Enough to explode across headlines. Florida 2001 cold case cracked. Confession shatters long-held alibi. The community reeled. Memories twisted. The harmless neighbor no longer felt harmless. But shock did not bring answers. And Laura Bennett remained missing. Because whatever happened that night in Florida in 2001 did not end when the sun came up. It only learned how to wait. When the confession leaked, the town inhaled all at once and forgot how to breathe. 20 years of silence had trained people to live around the absence, to step past the empty driveway, to stop wondering what had happened between night and morning. Now the silence had cracked, and through that crack poured suspicion, regret, and a question no one wanted to ask out loud. How close had they been to the truth all along? Detectives moved carefully, knowing how fragile confessions could be, especially late ones. Memory decays. Guilt mutates. Truth bends under pressure. Mark Holloway's statement was not a solution. It was a disturbance. It forced the case awake without telling it where to go. They replayed the recording again and again, listening for certainty, for a slip, for something solid enough to hold. His voice never rose, never broke. It hovered in that unsettling space between calm and calculation. He sounded like a man describing weather, not a life erased. They went back to the beginning, back to 2001, back to details that once felt too small to matter. The crooked car, the open garage, the dead phone battery, the sound no one could place. They asked themselves questions they should have asked before. If Laura left willingly, why leave everything behind? If someone took her, how did they do it without leaving a mark? And if Mark Holloway was involved, why wait 20 years to speak? Neighbors were re-interviewed. Older now, memories softened at the edges. What once sounded like certainty now came with hesitation. A car idling became maybe a truck. A shadow became maybe a tree. But one thing surfaced again and again. Mark was around more than people remembered. Not suspiciously, comfortably. He blended in so well that no one thought to look twice. That was the most disturbing part. He had not stood out. He had disappeared into plain sight. Police walked the neighborhood again, imagining it as it was before fear rewrote it. They traced Laura's usual jogging route, the sidewalks still cracked in the same places. They stood in her driveway at night, listening. The distance from Mark's house felt shorter now. Too short. A man could walk it in minutes. A car could roll it silently. Opportunity began to feel less abstract. They searched again, not with hope this time, but with obligation. Swamps, retention ponds, empty lots that had changed ownership 3 times since Laura vanished. Ground-penetrating radar hummed over earth that had learned how to keep secrets. Nothing surfaced. Florida soil, wet and forgiving, had a way of swallowing history. Mark Holloway was questioned again, this time with the weight of his own words pressing down on him. He recanted pieces, clarified others, claimed confusion, claimed exhaustion. His lawyer spoke for him more often now. The man who once offered an alibi freely now hid behind silence. Detectives noted the shift. Innocence did not require strategy, but guilt often did. Still, suspicion was not proof. And without proof, the case remained suspended, hovering between revelation and collapse. The media returned, louder than before. Old footage replayed beside new speculation. Phrases like possible suspect and person of interest filled the air. Laura's family was pulled back into the spotlight they had spent years trying to escape. Hope hurt differently now. It cut sharper because it came with faces and names. Her mother said she felt closer to answers than ever and further away at the same time. Her father stopped giving interviews altogether. As pressure mounted, so did rumors. Someone claimed Mark had been obsessed with Laura. Someone else insisted they had argued the week she disappeared. None of it could be proven. None of it could be ignored. Detectives tracked down old co-workers, old acquaintances, people who had drifted out of Mark's life years earlier. Some described him as quiet, others as angry. A few mentioned his tendency to hold grudges, to feel wronged by small slights. Still nothing that crossed the line into evidence. Then a new detail emerged, buried deep in a box of photographs taken the first day Laura was reported missing. In one image, barely noticeable, was a scuff mark near the side of the garage. At the time, it had meant nothing. Now it was measured, analyzed, debated. Could it have been from a shoe, a struggle, or just years of were misinterpreted through the lens of desperation? Forensic experts disagreed. The mark remained ambiguous, a Rorschach test for belief. Mark Holloway watched the coverage from home, or so he said. Reporters camped outside. Neighbors avoided eye contact. The man who once blended in now stood out painfully. He began making small, strange comments to those who would listen. About fate, about accidents, about how people never really know each other. Each comment was noted, logged, dissected. None were enough. Detectives felt the familiar frustration of cold cases. The closer they seemed, the more the truth retreated. They wondered if the confession was less about Laura and more about Mark himself, a need to confess without fully surrendering, to disrupt the narrative without finishing it. Partial truth can be more dangerous than lies. It keeps everyone searching in the wrong direction. The question of motive loomed, unanswered. Why Laura? Why that night? She was not random, but she was not obviously targeted either. Her routines were predictable, yes, but so were many others. Was it opportunity? Resentment? Something sparked and spiraled out of control? Theories multiplied, none strong enough to stand alone. In quiet moments, detectives considered the possibility they hated most. That Laura's disappearance had been simple, quick, that whatever happened left no dramatic scene, no cinematic struggle, just a decision, a mistake, and a body hidden well enough to erase a person from a map. Simplicity offered no comfort. It offered only finality. As months passed after the confession, momentum slowed again. Without new evidence, prosecutors refused to file charges. The public grew restless. Online forums filled with speculation, accusations, amateur timelines. Mark Holloway became a villain in some narratives, a victim of circumstance in others. The truth, wherever it sat, remained untouched. Laura Bennett's case returned to its familiar state, not fully cold, not fully alive. A limbo sustained by questions. Detectives refused to close it. They couldn't. The confession had changed something irreversible. It had shattered the old alibi, broken the illusion of certainty. Even if Mark was never charged, the past no longer looked the same. Late at night, when the office was quiet, one detective replayed the recording again. Mark's voice, calm, careful. He wondered what had finally pushed the man to speak. Fear of death, fear of exposure, or fear of carrying the secret alone any longer. Confessions often come when people can no longer live with themselves, or when they believe they can control the damage. Outside, the neighborhood remained. New families moved in. Children rode bikes past Laura's old house, now repainted, renamed, occupied by people who did not know the full weight of the ground beneath them. Life continued, indifferent and relentless. But the case did not rest, because somewhere between what was said and what was withheld, between a confession and a denial, Laura Bennett's story waited. And it would keep waiting, pressing against memory, against conscience, until someone finally spoke the part that mattered most. The air in Tampa that spring had a weight to it, sticky and oppressive, as if the city itself carried the memory of that night. April 2001 was supposed to be ordinary, schools in session, traffic predictable, routines like clockwork, but the disappearance of Laura Bennett had shattered normality, leaving behind a tremor that no one could ignore. 20 years later, that tremor was still felt in the corridors of the police department, in the homes of neighbors, in quiet conversations at grocery stores. Everyone remembered the fear that crept in, silent and patient, filling the spaces between words. Mark Holloway's partial confession had reopened everything. Files long considered dormant were yanked back into light, each photograph, note, and witness statement scrutinized under the harsh glare of renewed suspicion. Detectives reviewed the original scene photos again. The kitchen still pristine, coffee mug with dried rings, a small notepad with grocery items half written, folded laundry on the couch. No blood, no obvious sign of struggle. Yet, the details that once seemed insignificant now carried new weight. The half-open garage door, the car parked crookedly in the driveway, the faint scuff near the side of the garage. It was as though the house itself had been holding its breath for 2 decades, finally exhaling in the presence of the confession. Neighbors were questioned again, older now, their recollections fuzzier but tinged with hindsight. Some remembered Mark walking past Laura's house more than usual, waving as if everything were normal, unremarkable. Others recalled seeing a shadow near her garage, indistinct and fleeting. None of it was concrete. None of it gave anyone closure. But the pattern was unnerving. He had been there, closer than anyone wanted to admit, a presence so ordinary it had been invisible. Detectives began mapping his movements against Laura's routine, calculating the times he could have intercepted her, calculated to the minute. Opportunity, previously theoretical, became alarmingly tangible. The focus turned to the subtle inconsistencies in Holloway's original alibi. Television shows, previously trusted as markers of time, did not line up. Records were incomplete, but the silence of his phone during critical hours became as suspicious as an active trail. The simplest things, a missed phone call, a rerun that aired slightly earlier, transformed into potential cracks in the facade. Small windows into the night Laura vanished. If someone had planned it, or if it had been impulsive, the hours between 11:30 p.m. and 6 a.m. were all they needed. Mark Holloway's interviews became a careful dance. He offered fragments of recollection, half-truths, contradictions that were impossible to reconcile. He described being near her house, then denied it. He spoke of fear, but refused to specify whose or why. Accidents, mistakes, missteps, words that suggested an act without responsibility, consequences without clarity. Each sentence added tension rather than resolution, feeding the narrative of a confession without conclusion. Detectives listened, scribbled notes, tried to read between the pauses and the hesitations. The man sitting across from them seemed to be both willing and unwilling, present and absent, a ghost that haunted the investigation as much as the missing woman herself. Forensic teams revisited the crime scene. Advances in technology offered new hope. Chemical residue testing, soil analysis, even DNA recovery techniques that were barely available in 2001. Every surface, every corner of the driveway, every blade of grass was examined. Yet, even with 20 years of hindsight and technological advancement, nothing conclusive emerged. No trace of Laura. No DNA to link Holloway definitively. The earth held on to its secret, yielding only uncertainty. It was a reminder of how meticulous crime can be and how cruel time can be when it erases the evidence we rely upon. The community responded with a mix of disbelief and outrage. Families who had moved in since 2001 were confronted with the shadow of the past. Stories circulated. What if Holloway had always been dangerous? Could someone like him really hide such a crime in plain sight for so long? People who had known him as a neighbor, a quiet man who mowed his lawn and waved politely, now questioned every interaction. Trust evaporated in subtle ways. Neighbors no longer waved as freely. They studied each other with suspicion. The neighborhood reframed as a puzzle in which a single missing piece could have destroyed everything. The media seized upon every development, amplifying uncertainty and fear. Headlines blared, Florida 2001 cold case cracked, confession shatters alibi, and in the subtext lurked questions without answers. Opinion pieces debated the meaning of partial confessions, the psychology of delayed admissions, and whether justice could exist without tangible evidence. News crews returned to Laura Street, cameras catching the rustle of leaves, the uneven pavement, the streetlights that had survived 2 decades. Reporters knocked on doors, piecing together fragments of memory, pushing neighbors to remember details long suppressed. The air felt charged, alive with anticipation and dread, the community trapped between the past and a future that refused to make sense. Law enforcement, meanwhile, faced an impossible tension. The The confession had invalidated Holloway's old alibi. It did not give them a case that could be prosecuted. The justice system required certainty, proof, something tangible beyond a man's changing recollection. But detectives knew intuitively that the truth existed somewhere between the words spoken and the silence that followed. They retraced Laura's last known steps, reconstructed her routine with almost obsessive precision, and re-examined every witness statement. They pored over logs, receipts, phone records, anything that could anchor her last night to a timeline solid enough to charge someone. But the fragments refused to fit together neatly. Like pieces of a puzzle missing their edges, the narrative remained incomplete. The psychological toll on investigators was subtle but relentless. Every lead that dissolved under scrutiny felt personal. Every rumor that could not be substantiated became a mental weight. Cold cases were already dangerous in their emotional drain. They demanded a relentless, patient focus on absence, on silence, on what had never happened. Holloway's confession, however, brought an intensity that was almost cinematic in its effect. The past collided with the present, forcing police officers to navigate between hope and futility. It was a strain that left the precinct exhausted and haunted. Meanwhile, Holloway's behavior added layers of complexity. He began making cryptic comments, small, casual remarks to neighbors and acquaintances about fate, about accidents, about the fragility of routine. Some interpreted them as guilt manifesting, others as calculated manipulation. Detectives tracked these comments, but none were legally actionable. Still, the pattern was unnerving. A man who once blended seamlessly into his community was now visible in ways that demanded attention. Every casual remark became a data point in a case defined by ambiguity. The focus eventually shifted to motive, or the lack thereof. Laura Bennett had not publicly antagonized anyone. She had no known enemies. She had friends, colleagues, routines, predictable, yes, but unremarkable. Why her? Why that night? Investigators explored theories ranging from opportunistic crime to calculated intent, from revenge to accident, but nothing fit neatly. Motive is often the key to understanding, and yet here it was absent, leaving only conjecture and the cold calculus of opportunity. Without it, every theory felt provisional, every conclusion tentative. Detectives began to examine small, overlooked details. Marks on the garage, faint impressions in the grass, inconsistencies in witness statements, all became potential clues. Each was measured, photographed, analyzed in the hope that something would stick. Forensic psychologists were consulted to understand Holloway's behavior, to interpret the timing and nature of his delayed confession. Was it remorse? Was it manipulation? Was it simply a compulsion to speak? None of the interpretations were definitive. None offered the closure the family or community desperately wanted. Laura Bennett's family, having endured 2 decades of absence, experienced renewed anguish. The partial confession brought no answers, only questions. Every theory, every speculation reopened wounds they had tried to heal. They oscillated between relief, someone had spoken, and despair. No tangible outcome had been achieved. Grief, long simmering, reignited with intensity. They were reminded daily that closure, if it ever existed, was still out of reach. In public spaces, the tension became palpable. Conversations stopped when her name came up. Social media threads dissected Holloway's life, his routines, every interaction he had with neighbors, colleagues, or friends. Amateur detectives emerged online, mapping the timeline, debating inconsistencies, filling gaps with assumptions. The case became part folklore, part collective obsession. And yet, despite the intensity, no new evidence surfaced. The case floated in a liminal space, simultaneously alive and unreachable, a ghost hovering over the city that had forgotten and yet never truly let go. Late nights in the precinct were quiet except for the soft hum of computers and the occasional ring of a phone. Detectives reviewed the confession repeatedly, searching for nuance, inflection, anything that could provide a foothold. They listened to his cadence, noted pauses, the way he emphasized words. Each playthrough offered hints, possibilities, yet no confirmation. The law demanded more. The human mind craved narrative, and the two were rarely compatible in cases defined by silence and disappearance. Outside, the neighborhood had transformed. Houses repainted, families shifted, children grew up unaware of the absence that had once dominated the cul-de-sac. Life pressed forward, oblivious, relentless. Yet the streets themselves bore memory. In the uneven pavement, the scuff on the garage, the subtle changes in the landscape that spoke to a night the world refused to forget. Laura's absence had left a mark deeper than anyone could measure, a lingering presence felt in the smallest details. The detectives understood, though, that time itself was both ally and adversary. As years passed, witnesses aged, memories blurred, and physical traces decayed. Every moment that offered potential clarity was also a moment lost. Holloway's partial confession had created a window, brief and trembling, into the past. But whether it was enough to bridge decades of silence remained unknown. The challenge was monumental. Reconstruct the night from fragments, impressions, and shadows, and hope that the truth would emerge intact. Every day brought a mixture of frustration and revelation. A neighborhood tip, a forgotten photograph, a minor inconsistency. Each might represent the breakthrough everyone waited for. And yet, the case persisted in its cold, unyielding state. Laura Bennett's disappearance remained unsolved, a testament to the subtlety with which violence and absence can intertwine. Her story, partially told and partially hidden, haunted the city, the detectives, and her own family. It was a story that refused to end, a puzzle without edges, a silence that still demanded to be heard. The Florida sun rose hot and relentless, but could not burn away the shadow of that night in 2001. 2 decades had passed, yet the streets, the houses, even the air itself seemed to remember Laura Bennett's absence. Neighbors had adapted to emptiness as if it were another appliance in the house, something always on, always present, but invisible until noticed. When Mark Holloway's confession surfaced, that equilibrium shattered. Suddenly, the past refused to stay buried. People who had nodded politely at him for years now looked again, squinting for signs they had missed, searching for something they could never fully explain. Detectives reviewed the confession endlessly, dissecting every word, every hesitation, every pause. Mark's voice had a quiet precision, an almost casual cadence that made the confession more disturbing. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't remorseful. It was flat, measured, deliberate. And yet, within that flatness were fractures, tiny contradictions, half-recalled details, statements that hinted at proximity, intention, and fear, all without ever fully committing. The man had been so close to Laura's life, so intertwined in the background of her daily existence, that the confession felt like a shadow folding in on itself, illuminating some parts, leaving others forever dark. They revisited the neighborhood. Streets unchanged, yet different. Every yard, every mailbox, every streetlight became a potential witness to history. Detectives walked the sidewalks Laura once ran, imagining her jogging route, calculating the time it would take to intercept her, if someone had planned it, or if it had been impulsive. The driveway where her car had sat crookedly in the early morning was still cracked in the same places. The garage scuff remained a subtle imperfection on the sidewall. Small details, once meaningless, had acquired significance in the light of Holloway's words. Opportunity now had shape. Possibility had form. But evidence? Evidence remained cruelly absent. Mark Holloway's behavior during this renewed scrutiny was as controlled as ever. He neither denied nor confirmed everything, choosing to offer fragments, contradictions, and silence. Detectives noted how he would describe being near the house, then retract the statement. How he spoke of fear without explanation, of accidents without outcome. How he refused to say where Laura was or what had happened. Every response heightened tension rather than resolving it. Partial confessions are a weapon of psychological pressure. They create proximity without accountability, suspicion without certainty, dread without conclusion. Holloway wielded this unknowingly, or perhaps with chilling awareness. The community's reaction was immediate and intense. People revisited memories they had long suppressed. The friendly neighbor who waved every morning became suspect. The casual maintenance worker who fixed fences became frighteningly close to potential violence. Rumors circulated rapidly. Who knew what? Who might have seen something? What had been missed? Social media amplified speculation. Internet sleuths mapped routines, timelines, and inconsistencies. People debated motive, opportunity, and culpability, drawing diagrams and timelines on digital whiteboards. The public's fascination created its own pressure, an invisible force that pressed on detectives already burdened with 20 years of unanswered questions. The psychological toll on the law enforcement team was significant. Cold cases demand patience, focus, and endurance. But a confession that is incomplete, ambiguous, and delayed introduces a new kind of strain. Detectives wrestled with frustration, self-doubt, and obsession. Every fragment was scrutinized repeatedly, every minor discrepancy magnified into a potential lead. They revisited old notes, re-interviewed witnesses, combed through photographs, and reanalyzed physical evidence with the benefit of 2 decades of technological advancement. Yet the more they searched, the more elusive the truth became. Theories about motive were endlessly debated. Laura Bennett had no known enemies, no overt conflicts, no financial troubles, no romantic entanglements that could suggest a reason for her disappearance. She was ordinary in the ways that make some people targets, predictable routines, visible in the community, trusting to the point of vulnerability. Was this opportunistic? Was it personal? Random? The lack of motive added a layer of terror. When motive is absent, crime feels arbitrary, and the arbitrary is unbearable for those left behind. Detectives returned to physical evidence repeatedly. The garage scuff, small and easy to miss, was analyzed for traces of DNA or fibers. Soil samples from the driveway were re-examined with modern techniques, searching for microscopic remnants of human presence. Clothing, if any had been disturbed, was long gone, absorbed into the environment or discarded without trace. Every attempt to reconcile the confession with tangible proof ended in frustration. Laura's absence was a vacuum into which every investigation collapsed, leaving behind only questions. Mark Holloway's interactions became increasingly scrutinized outside formal interviews. Friends, acquaintances, even casual neighbors were observed, asked about offhand remarks he had made regarding accidents, responsibility, and human error. These statements were not legally actionable, but psychologically significant. Detectives noted patterns of evasiveness, repetition, and subtle control of narrative. Holloway's words were precise enough to provoke doubt, vague enough to shield him, and deliberate enough to unsettle anyone listening carefully. The media frenzy reached a peak. Local and national outlets covered the renewed interest in Laura Bennett's disappearance, framing Holloway as both suspect and enigma. Phrases like cold case breakthrough and confession shatters alibi dominated headlines. Reporters returned to the streets of her neighborhood, filming empty driveways, pastel houses, and children playing where absence once dominated. Interviews with neighbors revealed unease, lingering fear, and questions about safety and vigilance. Social narratives began to intertwine with official investigation, creating pressure to produce answers that might not exist. The law, however, demanded proof. A confession without corroboration, without tangible evidence, could not lead to conviction. Detectives understood this acutely. Holloway's statement had dismantled his alibi, opened a window into possibility, and disrupted 2 decades of assumption. But without physical corroboration or motive, the confession alone could not close the case. Frustration grew, balanced by a sense of awe at the precision with which he had controlled his narrative for 20 years. Opportunity and proximity were undeniable. Responsibility remained uncertain. Within the precinct, the confession's reverberations influenced strategy. Detectives revisited every witness, every neighbor, every casual interaction. Old co-workers were re-interviewed. Ex-boyfriends, ex-husbands, friends of friends. All were examined for potential insights, contradictions, or previously overlooked statements. Minor inconsistencies became focal points, small details magnified into potentially critical evidence. Every fragment was scrutinized with the intensity of someone attempting to reconstruct a world from ashes. Holloway's psychological profile was analyzed with experts. Delayed confessions are rare, and each carries its own signature: remorse, calculation, fatigue, or compulsion. In Holloway's case, experts debated whether he sought relief, manipulation, or a combination of both. His calm delivery suggested self-control, yet the content revealed guilt or knowledge. Partial admissions are inherently destabilizing. They provoke reconsideration without providing closure. Law enforcement operated within this tension, chasing certainty through a fog deliberately or unconsciously maintained. The physical landscape of the crime remained constant, yet laden with new significance. Streets, yards, and sidewalks were familiar but transformed under the weight of hindsight. Minor imperfections, a crack in pavement, a scuff on the garage, were now treated as potentially meaningful. The ordinary was now ominous. Every step along Laura's previous routes was retraced, every sight line recalculated, every environmental variable noted. Time had rendered evidence fragile, but opportunity remained discernible. Public perception evolved. Neighbors scrutinized every encounter. A smile, a wave, or a casual greeting could no longer be interpreted at face value. Holloway, once invisible, was now hypervisible. Community trust eroded subtly, but persistently. Rumors intertwined with facts. Perception mingled with memory, and the narrative of Laura Bennett's disappearance expanded beyond police files into collective consciousness. The story became larger than the individual, a shared anxiety anchored to streets, homes, and absent presence. Investigators confronted the limits of human perception. Memory fades, witnesses misremember, and physical traces vanish. The partial confession amplified these challenges, forcing the team to operate in ambiguity. Every new hypothesis required careful consideration. Every old assumption was challenged. The cold case became a puzzle in which pieces shifted over time, never fully locking into place. Frustration and obsession intertwined, compelling meticulous work under psychological strain. Laura Bennett's family endured renewed anguish. A confession without evidence provided no closure, only renewed grief. They oscillated between hope that truth had finally emerged and despair at the continued absence of resolution. Interviews with media outlets reflected careful wording, cautious optimism, and the persistent ache of uncertainty. 20 years of waiting had conditioned them to a persistent ache. The confession simply transformed it into something sharper, more urgent, more real. Time, detectives realized, was both ally and adversary. Each year that passed eroded potential evidence, but enriched understanding of behavior, routine, and opportunity. Holloway's statements provided a psychological window into events long past, yet the past remained opaque. Investigators reconstructed timelines, compared recollections, and analyzed patterns, always aware that the case existed at the intersection of memory, chance, and absence. Even with modern forensic tools, 2 decades of silence had allowed details to decay, leaving gaps that might never be bridged. The narrative of Laura Bennett's disappearance persisted in the public consciousness. Online forums dissected the case with a blend of speculation and pseudo-investigation. Amateur sleuths mapped timelines, highlighted inconsistencies, and debated potential motives. The case became a story told in fragments, each interpretation layered atop the last, creating a dense overlay of uncertainty and obsession. The collective imagination fed on absence, thriving on what was missing as much as on what had been said. In the precinct, The case continued to consume attention. Every potential lead, every tip, every minor observation was revisited. Investigators moved between hope and despair, understanding the fragility of each insight while clinging to the necessity of pursuit. The confession had changed everything and nothing. Opportunity and suspicion had become tangible, yet proof remained elusive. Each day was a reminder that cold cases live in the tension between what is known and what is unknowable. Laura Bennett's disappearance, once a quiet absence, had grown into a persistent presence, a shadow over streets, houses, and lives. Holloway's confession had reopened wounds, reshaped perception, and forced confrontation with questions that had once been manageable only because they were ignored. Now, every unanswered question was vivid, insistent, pressing on detectives, family, and community alike. The past refused to remain quiet, demanding attention, demanding engagement, demanding acknowledgement of the unresolved truth. And so the investigation continued. Streets were retraced, witnesses re-interviewed, physical evidence re-examined with the tools that time had made available. Holloway's statements were parsed, cross-referenced, and scrutinized. Community memory and perception were mapped alongside physical timelines. Yet for all the energy, all the effort, the truth remained just beyond reach. Laura Bennett was still missing, her story still incomplete, her absence still resonating in the spaces she once inhabited. The cold case endured, alive in tension, unresolved, a haunting that refused to fade. Holloway's confession had shattered certainty, disrupted the past, and reopened the question of what had truly happened that night in April 2001. Detectives knew that despite all efforts, the final pieces remained elusive. The case was a mosaic of absence, of memory, of fragmented truth, a story told in shadows, pauses, and silence. And as always, it waited, patient, haunting, unresolved. The tension that gripped Tampa did not ease as the investigation continued. It grew, tightening like a cord around the community. Neighbors who had once waved casually at each other now glanced with suspicion. The ordinary gestures of daily life shaded with doubt. Laura Bennett's absence, once a distant concern, had become a tangible presence, a ghost that refused to be ignored. 20 years had passed, and yet the streets still remembered. The sidewalks still bore the imprint of that night, even if invisible to the untrained eye. Every detail mattered now. Every scuff, every misaligned object, every fleeting recollection, and detectives pored over them with painstaking obsession. Mark Holloway remained a puzzle. Calm, deliberate, precise, his voice carried the weight of responsibility without admitting it fully. He recounted fragmented moments near Laura's house, describing shadows, movements, fear, and accident in a manner that frustrated and obsessed investigators. Every word offered hints, but no confirmation. Partial confessions are a psychological weapon. They create proximity without accountability, suspicion without proof, dread without release. Holloway had mastered this unknowingly, forcing the investigation to orbit around him without allowing it to land. The detectives began to notice patterns they had overlooked before. Holloway's proximity, his routines, and the minutiae of his behavior were now more significant than any overt threat. The casual maintenance worker, the neighbor who waved, the man who fixed fences, all ordinary details that concealed extraordinary potential. He had been present in her life without arousing alarm, a quiet figure whose familiarity masked something darker. Opportunity, once theoretical, became alarmingly tangible. Every route Laura took, every routine she maintained, every predictable movement was suddenly a map of possible danger. The investigation turned inward, probing old files, forgotten tips, and long-dismissed leads. Each minor inconsistency was reevaluated. The car left crooked in the driveway, the garage door left open, the faint scuff on the side of the garage wall. At the time, these details had been noted and filed away. Now, 20 years later, they were magnified, analyzed, measured and interpreted. Opportunity, presence, and proximity had new dimensions. The detectives approached these artifacts as if they could speak, and in a way, they did, whispering hints of what might have occurred in the dark hours of April 2001. Forensic analysis reached a new stage. The soil around the driveway, previously considered unremarkable, was sampled for residual biological traces. Fibers, microscopic traces, anything that might survive 2 decades of Florida humidity, sun, and rain were examined under new technologies unavailable in 2001. Nothing concrete surfaced. Each test returned negative, inconclusive, or ambiguous. The absence of evidence reinforced the sense of horror. A crime could have been committed with precision, without leaving a trace, and still linger invisibly over the lives of all who remained. Community perception was a pressure all its own. Residents replayed years of casual encounters in new light, searching for signs they had missed. Every wave, every conversation, every shared smile became suspect. Holloway, once invisible, became hypervisible. His mere presence elicited fear, uncertainty, and speculation. Rumors spread through neighborhoods and online forums, intertwining fact, conjecture, and obsession. Amateur detectives created timelines, debated motives, and analyzed behavior, turning collective curiosity into a relentless force that both aided and complicated the official investigation. Psychologists consulted on the case noted the peculiar nature of delayed confessions. Holloway's partial statements suggested compulsion, a need to confess without fully admitting responsibility. The timing, 2 decades later, indicated either relief from long-buried guilt or a calculated strategy to disrupt perception. Investigators understood that the confession was a double-edged sword. It brought attention, proximity, and suspicion, but it did not deliver truth or closure. The confession's incompleteness became both a puzzle and a torment, a force that compelled action without granting resolution. The detectives reconstructed Laura's last known movements, mapping every step, route, and pattern. Each movement became a timeline. Each timeline became a hypothesis, and each hypothesis was tested against Holloway's statements. They examined environmental factors, the curve of the road, visibility from windows, potential witnesses, and timing of nearby traffic. Every variable was calculated, considered, and weighed against the known facts. Yet the absence of Laura herself, the lack of tangible crime scene, and Holloway's evasions made certainty impossible. The past remained resistant to reconstruction. Media attention intensified the pressure. Headlines screamed, Florida 2001 cold case cracked, confession shatters alibi, emphasizing drama over resolution. News crews filmed quiet streets, pastel houses, and children playing in spaces once marked by fear. Interviews with neighbors revealed unease, lingering doubt, and speculation. Public discussion blurred lines between fact and conjecture, creating a narrative where innocence and guilt became subjective, fluid, and impossible to separate completely. The community itself became part of the investigation, a living, breathing witness to the unresolved. Holloway's own statements added layers of complexity. He spoke of fear, but never clarified whose or why. He described being near her house, then recanted or reframed it. He discussed accidents without outcomes, mistakes without resolution. Partial confessions are a psychological weapon, capable of destabilizing perception and magnifying anxiety. Detectives learn to interpret pauses, inflections, and hesitation as potentially meaningful, even when content remained ambiguous. Every word required careful attention, every omission scrutinized as a clue. The detective's emotional landscape was as complex as the investigation itself. Cold cases carry a psychological weight: frustration, obsession, self-doubt, and relentless attention to absence. Holloway's confession intensified that weight. It was a prism, refracting uncertainty, blame, and speculation through every interaction. Every lead that dissolved under scrutiny heightened anxiety. Every minor discovery, every slight inconsistency, became a potential breakthrough and a potential dead end. The investigation unfolded like a long shadow, stretching over the past and the present simultaneously. Laura Bennett's family experienced renewed anguish. The partial confession created hope, then stripped it away. They oscillated between relief that someone had finally spoken and despair at the absence of proof, clarity, or closure. Their grief, tempered by 2 decades, flared anew. Media attention reopened old wounds. Each interview and public statement a reminder that Laura remained missing, absent, unresolved. Every day, the uncertainty pressed upon them like a living weight, a shadow of the woman who had once walked their streets and now existed only in memory and speculation. The detectives confronted the limits of human perception. Memory fades, witness recollections blur, and physical evidence decays. The partial confession exposed these limitations, demonstrating that truth can be both present and elusive simultaneously. Investigators were forced to balance the psychological impact of Holloway's statements with the practical need for proof. They mapped behavior, reconstructed routines, and cross-referenced timelines, but gaps remained unbridgeable. Evidence was as much absence as presence, and absence has a haunting power all its own. Public fascination persisted. Online discussions, amateur analyses, and social media debates created layers of narrative outside official channels. Speculation blended with fragments of fact, creating a dense overlay of interpretation, conjecture, and obsession. Every minor discrepancy became material for discussion. Every rumor carried weight, magnifying the psychological effect of the case. The community became both witness and participant, caught between awareness and uncertainty, history and imagination, reality and reconstruction. Within the precinct, investigators became increasingly obsessive. Every tip, every potential inconsistency, every recollection of Holloway's behavior was cataloged, analyzed, and cross-checked. Each minor lead was followed with meticulous attention. The confession had altered everything and nothing. Opportunity and suspicion were real, yet proof remained elusive. The detectives operated in a tension-filled space, acutely aware that the case could not be solved without tangible evidence, yet recognizing the profound shift Holloway's admission had created. Physical spaces remained unchanged, yet significant. Sidewalks, yards, streets, and houses were familiar, yet every feature had gained weight under the lens of hindsight. Minor imperfections, a scuff, a crack, a shadow, were now potential clues. The neighborhood itself became a witness, its surfaces holding memory, its environment silently corroborating absence, opportunity, and the lingering presence of past events. The ordinary became sinister, and the familiar unsettling. Time remained both ally and adversary. Every year that passed eroded possible evidence, while enhancing understanding of behavior, routine, and opportunity. Holloway's confession opened a fleeting window into events long past, yet the past remained opaque. Investigators worked meticulously, knowing each piece of evidence, each fragment of recollection, might be the key to unlocking the case, or it might be a dead end. The balance between hope and frustration defined each day of renewed investigation. Laura Bennett's absence persisted as a haunting presence. Holloway's confession had disrupted assumptions, reshaped perception, and forced confrontation with unresolved questions. The investigation became a tension-filled mosaic of fragments, statements, memories, observations, and absence. The narrative refused to settle, existing in the space between what was known and what remained unknowable. Detectives continued to trace paths, analyze behavior, and evaluate evidence, knowing that the resolution of the case remained uncertain, but that the pursuit itself was necessary. The cold case endured, defined by tension, ambiguity, and the relentless search for truth. Holloway's partial confession shattered old assumptions, reopened questions, and illuminated gaps in understanding. The past, stubborn and resistant, continued to assert itself. Laura Bennett remained missing, her story incomplete, her presence felt in absence. The investigation pressed forward, guided by fragments, shadows, and the enduring need for answers. And as always, the case waited, patient, unresolved, a haunting force over the streets, homes, and lives she had once touched. The city of Tampa carried a heavy memory, one that no amount of sunlight, humidity, or routine could erase. Streets remembered footsteps, driveways remembered the angles of cars left crooked, garages remembered the faint scuff marks of a shadow passing too close. 20 years had compressed into the absence of Laura Bennett, and now, Mark Holloway's confession had opened the vault of that absence, forcing it into daylight where it refused to be neat, tidy, or explainable. The past was no longer past. It pressed against the present like a weight, relentless and inescapable. Detectives pored over Holloway's statements with obsessive scrutiny. Every pause, every hesitated word, every inflection became a potential clue. He spoke of being near Laura's house, of movement, of fear, of accidents, but never with enough clarity to satisfy the law. Partial confessions are dangerous. They illuminate without revealing. They suggest without confirming. They unsettle without closure. Holloway's careful, measured delivery amplified the tension. He became a shadow, both omnipresent and elusive, present in memory, yet absent from proof. Neighborhoods responded instinctively. People walked with sharper awareness. Casual waves now carried suspicion. The man who had blended into the fabric of community life suddenly seemed alien, uncanny, capable of things previously unthinkable. Friends and neighbors replayed past interactions in their minds, dissecting smiles, gestures, conversations for meaning that may or may not exist. The ordinary had become threatening, familiar had become ominous, and the fear that once lingered quietly in the background now pulsed at the forefront of daily life. Detectives returned to physical evidence, re-examining it through the lens of modern technology. Soil samples from the driveway, microscopic traces in the garage, fibers, residue, anything that might have been overlooked in 2001, were collected and analyzed. 2 decades had eroded much of what could be recovered, yet the possibility of discovery remained, and they pursued it relentlessly. Each negative result intensified frustration but did not diminish determination. The past held its secrets tightly, yet investigators knew that persistence, sometimes pride, loosed the impossible. Mark Holloway's behavior complicated the psychological landscape of the investigation. He oscillated between willingness and refusal, giving fragments, contradicting himself, speaking in measured tones that hinted at knowledge without confirming it. He described fear, proximity, accidents, yet refused to specify consequences, locations, or events. Partial confessions are destabilizing. They create tension, doubt, and obsession. Investigators found themselves caught in the web of his words, chasing certainty that may have never existed. The focus on motive grew more intense. Laura Bennett had no known enemies, no conflicts, no public disputes that might explain why she vanished. Her life had been ordinary in the ways that make people visible yet vulnerable. Predictable routines, trust, community presence. Was it opportunity? Impulse? Revenge? Random chance? The absence of motive magnified fear. When a crime appears arbitrary, it terrorizes more deeply than one with clear reasoning. The mind struggles to comprehend randomness, to impose narrative where none is evident. Community attention sharpened as media coverage intensified. Reporters returned to streets, filming homes, yards, children playing where absence had once dominated. Headlines blared, Florida 2001 cold case cracked, confession shatters alibi, but the public received fragments, not answers. Neighbors were interviewed repeatedly, their recollections reshaped by hindsight, fear, and the communal pressure to remember. Every casual encounter was dissected, every long-forgotten observation reevaluated. The town itself became a participant in the investigation, a living witness to unresolved history. Within the precinct, tension thickened. Cold cases are already taxing, demanding attention to absence and memory. Holloway's confession added complexity, forcing officers to navigate between hope and futility. Investigators reconstructed timelines, mapped routines, cross-referenced statements, and analyzed every variable with near-obsessive precision. The absence of Laura Bennett remained the central pivot around which every theory, lead, and suspicion revolved. Every discovery, no matter how small, was measured against decades of uncertainty. Investigators began to notice subtle but consistent patterns in Holloway's behavior. He spoke in measured tones, choosing words that hinted at proximity but avoided direct responsibility. He referenced fear but did not identify its source. He described accident and mistake without consequence. Partial confessions create psychological pressure. They imply knowledge and involvement, forcing law enforcement to engage with ambiguity. Holloway's statements were a map without labels, a series of signposts pointing toward answers that remained inaccessible. Physical spaces retained significance. The streets Laura once traversed, the driveway where her car sat, the garage wall with its scuff mark, all became anchors for investigation. Detectives retraced her jogging route, calculated potential encounters, noted lines of sight, and mapped every possible interaction. The environment itself became evidence in absence. Time had degraded the tangible, but opportunity and proximity remained, and investigators treated these intangible aspects with the same rigor as fingerprints or DNA. Public fascination expanded beyond local boundaries. Online forums, social media, and amateur sleuths dissected every detail. Timelines were created, inconsistencies debated, and behavior analyzed. Fact and speculation intertwined. The case evolved into a living narrative of fear, memory, and obsession. Community awareness intensified, amplifying both pressure on law enforcement and psychological weight on Holloway and neighbors alike. The story of Laura Bennett's disappearance became larger than its participants, a collective obsession threading through memory and imagination. Detectives faced the inherent limitations of perception and memory. Witnesses misremember, events fade, and physical evidence disappears. Holloway's partial confession heightened these limitations, forcing reliance on fragmentary information. Investigators meticulously reconstructed routines, timelines, and behavioral patterns, knowing that certainty was nearly impossible. Each lead required careful analysis. Each fragment of memory was weighed, and the absence of concrete evidence remained a constant obstacle. Laura Bennett's family lived renewed agony. The partial confession provoked hope, then stripped it away. They balanced relief that someone had spoken with despair over continued ambiguity. 20 years of waiting had dulled, but never erased pain. The confession sharpened it anew. Public attention reopened old wounds. Every interview, every statement in print or on camera served as a reminder. Laura remained missing, unresolved, and unreturned. Time was both ally and adversary for investigators. While the years had eroded physical evidence, they enhanced understanding of behavior, patterns, and opportunity. Holloway's statements provided insight, but did not reveal full truth. Investigators reconstructed events with meticulous care, balancing hope against the inevitability of incomplete evidence. Each day involved revisiting fragments of memory, statements, and environmental data, always aware that the final truth remained just beyond reach. The case persisted as a haunting force. Laura Bennett's absence shaped neighborhoods, precincts, and minds. Holloway's confession disrupted previous assumptions, reshaping perception and forcing confrontation with unanswered questions. Investigation continued, defined by tension, ambiguity, and relentless pursuit of truth. Streets and homes, once ordinary, became charged with memory. The story existed in shadows, pauses, and silence. And as always, the case waited, unresolved, patient, a persistent presence over the lives and spaces she had once occupied. The detectives understood one unassailable fact. The case was no longer static. It had moved from dormancy into active tension, driven by confession, absence, and a relentless will to uncover truth. But the final act, location, motive, resolution, remained elusive, hidden within decades of silence. Every detail, every observation, every fragment of memory could be the key, yet none could yet provide the closure demanded by law, morality, or human need. Holloway's partial confession had become the fulcrum of this tension. It was a revelation and an enigma simultaneously. It reshaped the investigation, forced the community to reevaluate the ordinary, and reintroduced fear, doubt, and obsession into spaces once thought safe. But it was also incomplete, leaving detectives suspended in uncertainty, families suspended in grief, and the community suspended between history and imagination. The narrative remained open, mutable, and unresolved. Laura Bennett's story, absent yet potent, persisted. Every day, her absence exerted pressure on investigators chasing fragments, on her family enduring uncertainty, on neighbors reevaluating the ordinary, on a city grappling with its own collective memory. Holloway's confession had changed the landscape, both physical and psychological, but had not answered the fundamental questions. What happened that night? Why? And by whose hand? These questions remained, sharp and insistent, unyielding to time, technology, or speculation. The cold case endured. It existed in tension between what was revealed and what remained hidden. Holloway's partial confession illuminated some paths while obscuring others. Detectives continued to trace movements, analyze behavior, and interrogate inconsistencies. The absence of Laura Bennett, once a quiet shadow, had become an active presence, shaping the psychological and investigative terrain of all involved. And so the search continued, relentless, unresolved, a haunting force over the city, over the streets she had walked, and over the lives she had left behind. The heat of a Florida afternoon did nothing to calm the tension that had gripped the city since Mark Holloway's confession surfaced. Streets, quiet in the midday sun, carried the weight of memory like an unshakable fog. Every step, every rustle of leaves, every faint echo of distant traffic seemed to carry traces of that night in April 2001 when Laura Bennett vanished. The neighborhood, once ordinary, had become a landscape haunted by absence. Windows reflected more than sunlight. They reflected suspicion, fear, and a lingering imprint of unanswered questions. Detectives immersed themselves in Holloway's statements again, listening, re-listening, parsing for nuance, hesitation, or contradiction. He described being near Laura's house, moving through shadows, hearing sounds, but always stopped short of full admission. He spoke of fear without specifying whose or why, of accidents without defining consequence. Every partial confession was a trap. It suggested guilt without proving it, proximity without accountability, knowledge without confirmation. Investigators felt both the power and the frustration of this carefully measured revelation. Neighbors were revisited. Those who had once waved casually now regarded him with caution. Conversations were replayed in memory, gestures reinterpreted, interactions scrutinized. The ordinary became sinister, and the ordinary people, once invisible, were suddenly under the lens of suspicion. Holloway's presence alone created a tension that radiated beyond law enforcement into the fabric of the community itself. Rumors and speculation intertwined with memories, and social media forums magnified every uncertainty into collective obsession. The investigation focused more sharply on timelines. Laura Bennett's routines, mapped meticulously, became grids of opportunity and risk. Each of her movements, from morning jogs to evening walks, was reconstructed against Holloway's known whereabouts, phone logs, and environmental factors. Detectives measured lines of sight, evaluated obstacles, and recalculated every possible scenario in which Holloway could have been present. Opportunity became palpable, almost physical, but certainty remained just out of reach. Forensic science offered both hope and frustration. Soil from the driveway, microscopic fibers from the garage, even residues from routine household cleaning were re-examined with technologies unavailable in 2001. DNA techniques, trace analysis, and chemical residue testing promised breakthroughs, but time had eroded too much. Each test returned inconclusive, leaving investigators to navigate the tension between what could have been recovered and what had been lost forever. The absence of evidence reinforced the cruel precision of the crime's lingering mystery. Holloway's behavior outside official interviews drew renewed attention. Casual remarks about accidents, fate, and human error were noted and cataloged. Psychologists suggested that his partial confession indicated compulsion or manipulation, or perhaps a mix of both. Every word became data. Every silence became meaningful. Partial confessions destabilize perception. They force those who hear them to imagine events, to fill in gaps, to chase certainty through a fog of ambiguity. Holloway's statements became the invisible threads around which the investigation now revolved. The media intensified scrutiny. Headlines blared. Florida 2001 cold case cracked. Confession shatters alibi, framing the narrative for national consumption. Reporters returned to Laura's neighborhood, filming empty driveways, pastel-colored houses, children playing where fear had once dominated. Interviews with neighbors revealed anxiety, lingering doubt, and the subtle terror of ordinary life reframed as dangerous. Public attention created a force field of expectation, magnifying pressure on investigators and amplifying Holloway's psychological presence. Detectives struggled with the absence of motive. Laura Bennett had no known enemies, no financial conflicts, no public disputes, nothing to explain why she had vanished. Her life was ordinary, her routines predictable, her trust implicit. The randomness of opportunity became terrifying. When crime lacks motive, the act appears arbitrary, and the arbitrary is almost impossible to reconcile with human logic. Investigators worked against a backdrop of this profound uncertainty, aware that their search was for fragments, patterns, and shadows rather than clear answers. Within the precinct, obsession mounted. Every lead was revisited, every statement reinterpreted, every minor inconsistency magnified. Detectives reconstructed Laura's final known day, cross-referenced Holloway's statements, and mapped potential interactions with obsessive precision. Every small fragment of memory became a pivot point for hypothesis and strategy. Time was both ally and enemy. Decades had allowed details to fade, but pattern recognition, behavioral analysis, and forensic innovation offered new possibilities. Community tension deepened. Neighbors' perceptions shifted. Trust eroded subtly. A casual smile, a wave, a friendly conversation, each became a potential warning sign. Rumors grew into local folklore. Online amateur sleuths debated every possible timeline, motive, and scenario, creating layers of narrative that both supported and complicated the official investigation. Laura Bennett's story had escaped the files and entered the collective imagination, haunting both streets and minds with its unresolved absence. Detectives confronted the fragility of human perception. Memory is imperfect. Witnesses misremember. Physical traces degrade. Holloway's partial confession amplified these challenges. Each theory required careful cross-examination of statements, environmental context, and behavioral evidence. Investigators walked a fine line between imagination and deduction, aware that the absence of proof could not stop obsession, nor could uncertainty halt the psychological momentum of the case. Laura Bennett's family experienced renewed torment. The confession sparked hope, then stripped it away. For 20 years, they had lived in a liminal space of grief and speculation. Now, fragments of revelation intensified the ache. Interviews reopened memories. Public attention amplified scrutiny, and every small development forced them to confront the incomplete story of a loved one vanished. The emotional weight was relentless. a constant reminder that resolution remained elusive. Investigators balanced persistence with frustration. Time offered insight into human behavior, patterns, and routines, yet physical evidence decayed inexorably. Holloway's statements illuminated opportunities, hinted at proximity, but could not bridge the gap between absence and proof. Each day involved meticulous reconstruction of events, behavioral analysis, and examination of environmental variables, all while navigating the impossibility of absolute certainty. The city's streets, homes, and sidewalks carried the invisible residue of Laura Bennett's disappearance. Every location, every route, every object became imbued with meaning under the renewed investigation. Minor imperfections, a crack in pavement, a scuff on a wall, a shadow in a window, became significant, as if the environment itself remembered. Detectives treated these signs as silent witnesses, interpreting absence as evidence, gaps as clues, and shadows as maps of possibility. Holloway's confession remained both revelation and enigma. It altered assumptions, reshaped perception, and introduced psychological pressure into the community and the investigation alike. Yet it remained incomplete. Opportunity, suspicion, and implied knowledge had been revealed. Location, motive, and tangible evidence remained elusive. The narrative existed in a space between illumination and darkness, defined as much by what was unspoken as by what was spoken. The cold case persisted, alive in tension, ambiguity, and relentless pursuit. Every fragment of information was examined, every inconsistency reevaluated, every detail given weight. Laura Bennett's absence exerted influence over detectives, family, and community. Holloway's words were both anchor and ghost, shaping the investigation while withholding resolution. Streets, houses, and homes were marked by memory, perception, and fear, the ordinary transformed into a landscape haunted by what had never returned. Investigators understood that the pursuit of truth was ongoing. The confession had broken long-held assumptions, disrupted 2 decades of dormancy, and refocused attention on opportunity, behavior, and proximity. Yet the final pieces, proof, motive, resolution, remained out of reach. Every day offered a new angle, a minor discovery, or a revisited statement, and yet the full story remained locked behind decades of silence. The tension persisted, patient, unresolved, haunting the city like a shadow that would not lift. And so the investigation continued, defined by the interplay of absence and presence, memory and speculation, confession and silence. Holloway's partial admission had reshaped the case, reframed perception, and forced confrontation with the unknown. Laura Bennett remained missing, her story unfinished, her absence a persistent force that shaped lives, streets, and minds. The case waited, patient and unyielding, a cold and unrelenting reminder that some mysteries endure even in the face of confession, attention, and relentless pursuit. The nights in Tampa carried a weight heavier than daylight, thick with humidity, memory, and suspicion. Every street lamp cast shadows that seemed to stretch longer than reality, and every creak of a sidewalk board or distant car engine triggered thoughts of that fateful night in April 2001 when Laura Bennett disappeared. Her absence had become a persistent echo in the city's consciousness, a ghost that marked the passage of time but refused to fade. With Holloway's confession now public, that echo had become deafening. It reverberated through the precinct, the streets, and the minds of those who had tried to forget. Detectives combed through Holloway's words obsessively, searching for the subtext, the hesitation, the minute inflections that might reveal the missing details. He spoke of proximity, of movements in the shadows, of accidents, yet refused to place definitive acts or outcomes into the narrative. Each partial confession was a double-edged sword. It drew law enforcement closer to him psychologically while maintaining a protective barrier against legal consequence. The tension was not just procedural, it was visceral. Every meeting, every interview, every note became saturated with anticipation, dread, and uncertainty. The neighborhood itself became an instrument of memory. Homes, driveways, and sidewalks were revisited, measured, and examined under the lens of 20 years of accumulated perception. Subtle imperfections, the scuff on the garage wall, the uneven crack in the driveway, the faded patch of grass, took on significance. Investigators imagined the night's sequence in excruciating detail, mapping possible movements, reconstructing routines, and calculating opportunities with methodical precision. Each shadow, each line of sight, each potential encounter became a thread in the web of conjecture. Community tension escalated. Residents replayed every interaction with Holloway, dissecting smiles, gestures, conversations, and even silences. Ordinary neighbors became suspect, casual interactions now potential evidence. Social media amplified every whisper, every memory, every half-remembered detail. Amateur sleuths mapped routes, analyzed behavior, and created timelines, creating layers of interpretation that both supported and complicated the investigation. The absence of Laura Bennett had become a locus of collective obsession, and Holloway's partial confession stoked the flames, demanding attention and psychological reckoning. The detectives' focus on timelines became more granular. Laura's routine, reconstructed in meticulous detail, became a grid of opportunity and risk. Her morning jogs, her routes to school or errands, every predictable step was overlaid against Holloway's known movements. Phone records, employment logs, and neighborhood schedules were cross-referenced, plotted, and analyzed. Opportunity, proximity, and presence became almost tangible, yet certainty remained elusive. The landscape of the investigation was one of shadows and hypothesis, informed by partial truths and absent evidence. Forensic examination reached new intensity. Soil samples from the driveway, fibers from the garage, residue from surfaces, all reanalyzed with modern technology, were scrutinized for what time might have spared. DNA testing, chemical residue analysis, and microscopic examination offered hope, but also frustration. The passage of 2 decades had degraded much of the tangible. Investigators were left balancing meticulous examination with the reality of decay. Absence became a form of evidence in itself, a reminder that some truths leave no trace. Holloway's psychological presence complicated matters further. Casual statements about accidents, missteps, and human error were analyzed for subtext. Psychologists suggested that the delayed partial confession reflected a compulsion, a need to confess without full disclosure or possibly calculated manipulation. Every word, every silence, every measured pause became a potential window into guilt or knowledge. Partial confessions are uniquely destabilizing. They force those who hear them to imagine outcomes, fill in gaps, and confront ambiguity while being denied closure. Holloway had become both suspect and puzzle, a shadow around which the entire investigation revolved. The media attention intensified pressure. National headlines screamed, "Florida 2001 cold case cracked, confession shatters alibi." Local coverage examined streets, homes, and empty spaces where fear had once dominated. Neighbors shared unease, speculated on past interactions, and questioned routine assumptions. Public perception now influenced investigation. The line between official fact and community narrative blurred. Social and media scrutiny added urgency, amplified fear, and heightened expectations for resolution. The detectives grappled with the absence of motive. Laura Bennett had led an ordinary life. No enemies, no financial conflicts, no visible disputes. The randomness of opportunity became its own terror. When a crime is arbitrary, it challenges comprehension, leaving investigators, family, and community to grapple with uncertainty. Without motive, the act itself appears senseless, and the human mind instinctively searches for patterns in absence, for causality where none may exist. Within the precinct, obsession intensified. Each tip, statement, and observation was dissected. Investigators reconstructed Laura's final day, cross-referenced Holloway's statements, and evaluated behavioral patterns with near-obsessive detail. The passage of time offered insight into routines and human behavior, yet eroded tangible evidence. Every fragment of memory, every trace, and every environmental variable became central to the pursuit of truth. The psychological toll on Laura Bennett's family was profound. The confession provided hope, only to strip it away again. 2 decades of grief, tempered into a dull, enduring ache, now flared new. Every media mention, every interview, every minor development forced confrontation with the incomplete story of a daughter, a sister, a friend who had vanished. Their lives were suspended between possibility and absence, trapped in the relentless tension of partial revelation. The investigation navigated the limitations of perception. Witnesses misremember, evidence erodes, and time distorts truth. Holloway's partial confession amplified these challenges. Investigators needed to balance the psychological implications of his statements with the practical requirements of law and proof. Every hypothesis was tested, every fragment considered, yet the certainty that could resolve years of anguish remained out of reach. Physical spaces were charged with latent significance. Streets Laura had walked, driveways she had crossed, homes she had passed, all became canvases for reconstruction. Minor imperfections, a scuff, a crack, a shadow, were treated as potential testimony. Investigators interpreted absence as evidence, silence as information, and patterns as potential explanation. The ordinary landscape of Tampa had been transformed into a forensic map of memory, opportunity, and psychological pressure. Holloway's confession remained a paradox, revealing and concealing simultaneously. It had reshaped assumptions, intensified psychological tension, and reframed the investigation, yet left the most critical elements undisclosed. Opportunity and proximity were illuminated. Location, motive, and tangible proof were withheld. The narrative existed in a liminal space between illumination and darkness, shaped by what was said, unsaid, and never to be known. The cold case endured, alive in tension, ambiguity, and relentless pursuit. Every detail was examined, every inconsistency interrogated, every fragment of memory analyzed. Laura Bennett's absence remained a constant presence, influencing detectives, family, and community. Holloway's words served as both anchor and specter, shaping investigation while withholding resolution. Streets, homes, and neighborhoods were marked by memory, speculation, and lingering fear. The ordinary transfigured into a terrain haunted by unresolved mystery. Investigators knew that the pursuit of truth would continue indefinitely. Holloway's partial confession had disrupted 2 decades of dormancy, refocused attention on opportunity and behavior, yet had not delivered closure. The final pieces, motive, evidence, resolution, remained beyond reach. Each day brought incremental insight, minor discovery, and careful reconstruction, yet the full picture remained locked behind decades of silence, ambiguity, and human frailty. And so the case persisted, defined by the interplay of absence and presence, confession and silence, memory and conjecture. It continued to dominate thoughts, strategies, and emotions. Holloway's admission had altered the landscape, brought fear and obsession to the surface, and forced confrontation with uncertainty. Laura Bennett remained missing, unresolved, her absence a living force shaping lives, neighborhoods, and minds. The cold case waited, patient, unyielding, haunting, its story unfinished, a shadow over Tampa that refused to dissipate. Night fell over Tampa, heavy with humidity and memory. Streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across driveways and sidewalks, painting ordinary homes with a brush of suspicion. Every faint noise, a creak of a board, the hum of distant traffic, the rustle of leaves, felt amplified, laden with the unspoken narrative of Laura Bennett's disappearance. Her absence, once a quiet ache, had become a persistent pulse in the city's consciousness. 20 years of silence had compressed into this single revelation. Mark Holloway's partial confession, a fissure opening a gulf between past and present, certainty and doubt. Detectives scrutinized Holloway relentlessly. Each word was examined for hesitation, tone, and nuance. He spoke of being near Laura's house, of movements in the shadows, of fear, of accidents, but never with clarity sufficient for conviction. Partial confessions create a unique psychological pressure. They suggest culpability without providing evidence, proximity without accountability, knowledge without confirmation. Investigators found themselves orbiting him, tethered by implication yet blocked by ambiguity. Every interaction became a high-stakes negotiation with absence itself. Neighborhoods responded with heightened vigilance. Casual gestures, the wave of a hand, a friendly nod, were replayed in memory with suspicion. Ordinary neighbors became potential witnesses, their behavior reevaluated under the lens of the extraordinary. Rumors spread, amplified by social media, online forums, and local discussion boards. Amateur sleuths mapped Laura's last known movements, tracked Holloway's routines, and debated every minute inconsistency, turning collective memory into a public investigation that both aided and complicated official efforts. Detectives reconstructed Laura's life with obsessive precision. Her daily routines, from morning jogs to late-night errands, were plotted against Holloway's known whereabouts, employment schedules, and community patterns. Every route, line of sight, and potential encounter was considered. Opportunity had become almost tangible, a ghost of possibility, but certainty remained elusive. The investigators were trapped in a tension between proximity and proof, presence and absence, time's erosion and memory's persistence. Forensic analysis reached an intensity previously unimaginable. Soil samples, fibers, and trace residues from driveways, garages, and nearby properties were re-examined using technologies unavailable in 2001. DNA analysis, chemical residue testing, and microscopic examination promised breakthroughs, yet the passage of time had eroded much. Each negative result, inconclusive finding, or ambiguous trace intensified frustration but reinforced the haunting reality. Some evidence leaves no trace, and some crimes linger in shadow, immune to detection. Holloway's psychological complexity became central to the investigation. Casual remarks about accidents, missteps, and human error were parsed for subtext. Psychologists suggested that the delayed partial confession indicated a compulsion, a desire to confess without fully exposing guilt, or perhaps a strategic manipulation. Each inflection, pause, and measured word was cataloged as data. Partial confessions destabilize perception. They force law enforcement and community alike to imagine the unseen, to fill in blanks, to confront ambiguity without closure. Holloway became both suspect and enigma, the axis around which the investigation spun. Media coverage amplified tension. Headlines proclaimed, Florida 2001 cold case cracked. Confession shatters alibi, framing the story with drama and urgency. News crews filmed quiet neighborhoods, empty streets, and homes where life continued under the shadow of unresolved absence. Neighbors offered interviews tinged with fear, recollection, and speculation. Public attention became a force, exerting pressure on investigators while amplifying Holloway's psychological presence. Fear, obsession, and anticipation seeped into the community, entwining with fact, rumor, and memory. The absence of motive confounded detectives. Laura Bennett had led an ordinary life, without known enemies, public disputes, or financial conflicts. The arbitrariness of opportunity transformed the disappearance into a psychological terror. Randomness is difficult for the mind to reconcile. Humans crave causality, patterns, and reason. In the absence of clear motive, every interaction, every movement, every minor inconsistency took on heightened significance, demanding interpretation and scrutiny. Within the precinct, obsession escalated. Every statement, tip, and memory fragment was analyzed. Investigators reconstructed Laura's final hours, cross-referenced Holloway's statements, and assessed behavioral patterns with near-obsessive precision. The passage of time had eroded physical evidence, but analytical methods, pattern recognition, and psychological profiling offered new insight. Minor details became pivotal, small inconsistencies became potential breakthroughs, and every fragment of memory a potential key to unlocking decades of silence. Laura Bennett's family endured renewed torment. Holloway's confession offered the hope of resolution, only to withhold it once more. 2 decades of grief, tempered by routine and endurance, flared anew. Public attention reopened wounds and demanded engagement. Every interview, every media reference, every minor procedural update reminded them that Laura remained missing, unresolved, and beyond reach. Their emotional landscape mirrored the investigation, suspended between hope and despair, knowledge and absence, revelation and enigma. Investigators confronted the limitations of human perception. Witness memory fades, environmental evidence decays, and time distorts truth. Holloway's partial confession magnified these challenges. Officers had to balance the psychological weight of his words with the practical demands of evidence and procedure. Every theory was tested, every fragment of memory scrutinized, every environmental variable considered, all in pursuit of an elusive certainty that seemed perpetually out of reach. Physical spaces carried significance beyond their mundane function. Streets, homes, and sidewalks where Laura had walked were mapped, measured, and reimagined as potential evidence. Imperfections, a scuff, a crack, a shadow, were treated as silent witnesses. Investigators interpreted absence as presence, silence as testimony, and patterns as potential insight. Ordinary urban landscapes became forensic landscapes, imbued with history, memory, and latent meaning. Holloway's confession remained paradoxical. It illuminated opportunity and proximity while withholding motive and proof. It reshaped assumptions, intensified psychological pressure, and reframed the case while leaving the fundamental questions unresolved. The narrative existed in a liminal space, suspended between revelation and darkness, shaped as much by what was unspoken as by what was admitted. The cold case persisted, alive in tension, ambiguity, and relentless pursuit. Every fragment was examined, every contradiction analyzed, every memory interrogated. Laura Bennett's absence dominated minds and streets. Holloway's words were both anchor and specter, shaping the investigation without delivering closure. Neighborhoods, streets, and homes carried the imprints of memory and fear, and ordinary landscapes had been transfigured by unresolved mystery. Investigators understood that truth would not arrive passively. Holloway's partial confession had disrupted decades of dormancy, redirecting attention to opportunity and behavior. Yet the key pieces, motive, location, resolution, remained hidden. Every day offered minor insight, incremental progress, and renewed analysis. Yet the complete story was locked behind the wall of time, silence, and human limitation. The case continued to dominate the psychic terrain of Tampa. Holloway's confession had reshaped perception, brought fear to the surface, and forced engagement with ambiguity. Laura Bennett remained missing, her story incomplete, her absence a living force shaping streets, communities, and minds. The cold case waited, patient, unyielding, haunting, a shadow that stretched across time, unbroken, unresolved, unforgotten.